This is a quick demonstration on how to configure a PPPoE server and client setup on a Cisco iOS device. So PPP over Ethernet allows us to create authenticated assignment of IP addresses. So let's say CR1 is the ISP router here that we manage, and we have CR2 as our branch office router that requests a global routable public address so they can reach the internet. We can do an authenticated assignment of that IP address via PPPoE. So it is very similar to DHCP, except that we have a slightly different scenario that we leverage the PPP protocol to give out our addresses, and we can optionally add PAP or CHAP authentication. So addresses can be assigned via IPCP, which is a /32 address always, or DHCP, in which we can also send in the subnet. In this example, I am creating it via IPCP. So that's why this network is 1000/32 with .10 for the CR1, the PPPoE server, and CR2 will get the .1 address on the dialer 1 interface. So PPPoE consists of two phases. We have the active discovery phase, which in the client sends a broadcast initiation. The server responds with an offer. The client says, okay, I want to use that address, and the server responds with a session if a confirmation of that address. So it's very similar to DHCP, where the first request is a broadcast and afterwards it is all unicast. So once this has been established, we move over to the PPP session phase, where the link control protocol has been established. And after that, we go through the PPP authentication if we configure that. And the last step is the network control protocol, NCP, which actually gives out the address, in this case via IPCP. So because it's a PPP, we create host routes for our neighbor. So CR1 will create a /32 host route to the .10 address for CR1. And likewise, CR1 will create a host route for CR2. That's why these addresses do not need to be on the same subnet. We do not need a /30, /24, or anything of the sort. We just need the /32 address. That's why I'm using a /32 address here. So let's get started on the configuration. I'm going to configure CR1, which is the server first, and then I'm going to move over to the client. So I'm going to do most of this stuff via Notepad, and I'm going to start on the server. So let me go into configuration mode, and the first step is to create a broadband access group for PPPoE named PPPoE. You can name this whatever you want, and you want to link this to a virtual template. In this case, that is virtual template 1. So let me copy this for later on. And then we want to link this broadband access group. We want to link that to our physical interface. So interface gigabit 0, I want to no-shot this, and I want a PPPoE enable group, and then link that to that PPPoE group. So that is what links this interface to that broadband access group, and that is the only configuration we need on this physical interface. I want to go to interface virtual template 1, and under here I want to set the encapsulation to PPP. That is the default, but I'm just putting it in here to make a point. If I want to change the MTU, I do that with the IPv4. So that's IPv4 MTU 1492, which is the default for PPPoE. And I want to give this an address. So if I do IP add for 100.10.255.255.255.255, this will be rejected by iOS because you cannot configure a /32 address on a virtual template interface. So we want to do IP unnumbered and loopback 1, for instance, and then we want to create our interface loopback 1 and then set that address on the loopback. Then it will be accepted. So I'm going to put this in first, and then afterwards I put in the virtual template, and under the virtual template I also want to configure the IP address of the peer. So I do that with peer default IP address and then link that to a pool called IPCP. So that is the IPCP local pool command. If you want to use DHCP, you put in DHCP here, not a pool. So I want to link this to a local pool, so I'm just going to name it IP local pool IPCP and then put in that single address for the host. So optionally, we can also put in authentication here, and you also do that under the virtual template. And for this scenario, I'm using authentication for PAP. So PPP authentication PAP, and we want to create a username that the client will use to authenticate to us. So that in this case is CR2, so the host name of the device by default, but you can put in something else if you want. And I want to put a password string called password. So that is basically the full config for CR1. And if I haven't made any mistakes, this will paste in just fine. So that's that. So I want to configure the client second. So if I go to my Wireshark capture right now, I don't really have any traffic for PPPoE in here. We just have some messages for the loop here. So this is because the client will start the PPPoE session. The session is not started by the server, so we won't really see any traffic in here until we configure the client. So let's do that next. So I can pretty much remove this configuration. Let's start fresh. So gigabit 0. So that is also the underlying interface for CR2. And I want to say PPPoE client, dial pool, number. In this case, I'm using number 12. I want to go in the interface dialer 1. So this dialer 1 interface does not need to match that dial pool number. So I want to say dialer pool, and this does need to match that number. IP MTU again for 1492, and cap PPP. IP address negotiated. So negotiated is get an address via IPCP, not DHCP. And I want to set some authentication in here. So PPPoE, send username, CR2, password. So that is the whole configuration for the client. Basically, I want to put a no shot on this interface as well. And optionally, I want to create a static route because in a real life scenario, this is a gateway to the internet. So I just want to create a default route to 10010. You can also put the exit interface dialer 1 here because it's encapsulation PPP. So it is a point-to-point interface. I could just put that interface in there. So that is the whole configuration for CR2. Let me paste that in. And after this is done, I will start seeing some messages on my PPPoE session. So we have the initiation request sent from R2. So that is the 02222 to R1. So we have the initiation, then we have the offer from the server to the client. We have the request from the client to the server, and we have the session from the server to the client. And down here, you can see that the PPP LCP has started. So the LCP from the client to the server and from the server to the client, and an acknowledgement. And this NAK is basically stuff they don't support. So PPP sends over more information than just this IPCP, the network control protocol, the authentication. So if they don't agree on some form of sub protocol, you get this NAK. So that's not really something to worry about. The authentication is in here. So we have authentication PAP. So we can see, you can clearly see the password in here because we're using PAP and not CHAP. So we can see that the message is nothing in here. If it was rejected, you will have authentication rejected in here. So a blank message here is accept. And we can see we have the IPCP in here. So the IPCP should show, that's not what I want to do, should show the neighbor address and the server address. So here we can see the address that has been negotiated via IPCP. So once that is done, that is basically the last step, and we will know that our session is operational. So let me go to my terminal again, and if I go on CR1, show IP interface brief, I should have this 1001 address on this dialer 1 interface. And you can see that the interface virtual access 1 has gone up. On the CR1, if I do show IP interface brief, I can see that this virtual template 1 will remain down. However, we have a virtual access which is up, which has the same IP address of our loopback and our virtual template. So if I go on my client, if I do show IP route connected, I should have a host route for 10010, and I also have a route for myself, of course. So if I do ping 1001, I can ping myself, and if I try to ping the server, that works as well. And if I do show IP route static, I will have that static route to my internet connection, basically. So that is the basic setup of PPP. If you configure it with a IP unnumbered, you can also ping yourself when you are the server. But if you just use a virtual template with, let's say, a /24 address, you cannot ping yourself on that virtual template. So that is the basic configuration of PPP, and I hope this has been informative. Thank you.